Hopefully you can see me alright for the sunlight. It's that time of day when there's not much light and not much shade. It's that low down in the sun. However, parts have arrived. So this is hopefully going to repair my hazard lights. And obviously we've been trying to get this continuing saga of putting the Mustang through its MOT so I can start using it on a permanent basis. So far, fixing my plate lights, fixed the fog light, we've sorted out the handbrake. Now in this video, hopefully, I'm going to sort out the hazard lights. Now the hazard lights weren't working. I think I've got a clip of what's actually happening when you turn the hazard lights on. If I have, I'll slide it in here. If I haven't, they're just coming on and they're flicking very quickly, literally very quickly. Now there's a number of things that can cause that. One could be a faulty bulb or a faulty connection on the bulb. It's obviously not that because the indicators are working perfectly well. It could be a blown fuse. It's not a blown fuse because, again, the indicators are working perfectly well and they're both on the same fuse. It could be a bad earth or a dirty earth or a disconnected earth. Again, it's not that because the indicators or the turn signals, they're working perfectly well. It could be a broken wire. It doesn't appear to be a broken wire. Everything seems to be okay from having a quick look at them all. What I've kind of pinpointed down to is this little button here, which is the hazard light switch itself. Now that's part of one unit which forms the turn signal or the indicator stalk, the multifunction stalk, if you like, on this particular Mustang. So I ordered a new one of those. Now I could have taken the old one off and tried cleaning it, messing about with it, but there's bound to be little connections and springs in there that may well break or be lost. So I decided just to buy one instead, because they're relatively cheap. So I'll slide this out of here, and you can pretty much see, once I take this cover off, now you can pretty much see the way it connects to the steering column. It'll go on that way around, so that bit's facing me, and this is the hazard light switch on the top, which does seem to work better with a better click than the one that's on the car. Now that one sounds much better than that one does. So in today's video I've got to get the old one off, which means part of the column's got to come apart. So let's get into that. Now I've already disconnected the battery, as you can see in this, because there's a couple of things you need to do. First of all, you need to get this ignition switch out. If you don't take the ignition switch out, you're not going to be able to separate these two halves of the steering column cover, which means you won't be able to get in where you need to unbolt the old arm, where the new one's gone, to unbolt the old arm and replace it with this one. And I'm not sure how well you're going to be able to see this. Hopefully you can see, but just there's a hole, and then follow that back, there's another hole there. But also there's this little hole in here. Now that's going to be important in a minute. And then obviously across the other side there's a hole there. There's not one on this side, there's only the 3 screws that actually hold this together, and that little hole there. And the reason that little hole there is because you need this to poke in there. And that's got to go in there, and that's how we're going to release this ignition switch. And the easiest way to do that, or the only way to do that rather, you first of all need to turn the ignition on. Now, like certain models of American car going back a few years, when you put the key in the ignition on an American car, unlike it is in English cars these days or European cars, it's not the key that you turn to start the car, it's the actual ignition, the actual switch itself. Now it's a bit like an old-fashioned wing nut, if you can remember what they are. I'll stick a quick photograph in of what a wing nut looks like, just in case you've never heard of one and never seen one before. It's actually the wings that you turn on the side of it. The ignition key itself fits in between those, so you get those to turn. Now, apparently, in order to get the ignition out, the ignition switch out, there's a little pin in there that needs turning. But first of all, you've got to turn the ignition on, which is why I disconnected the battery. Because once the ignition's turned on, that means all the circuitry in the dashboard and the entire car is live. And I didn't really want to leave it with a live ignition whilst I'm dismantling it all. Also didn't want to run the risk of shorting something out and causing more damage, so I just disconnected the battery. So if we turn the ignition on, and then if we get this in here, there should be, assuming I'm in the right hole, there should be a pin there somewhere, and you push the pin in, and that should allow the ignition switch to come out. assuming you can find the pin. Because this is going so well. There's also this here, which is the steering column adjuster. Now, I've got the steering column pretty much adjusted flat at the moment. That needs to come out as well. Now, on the bar of it here, there's a flat edge, which works out at 7mm. So this, if you can see it, so this is a 7mm spanner. And hopefully we can get that on there and just give that a bit of a turn. And that then should just unscrew out of there. There's no wires, no cables or anything like that. And that's that out. And that loosens this off a little bit more. Now hopefully you can see, but there's also a couple of bolts under here. Now I've got one out already. That's out on there. And that comes from just in there. You need to take this one out as well. And then this panel can drop, and that will give you access to all of that panel. So let's see if we can get this one out. There we are. That's the second one out. Well, that should be loose at the bottom, which it is, and it should just be a case of pulling it from up here. There we are. So that bit just clips in. There we are. So 3 pins, all of that in place under the dash, and obviously the 2 bolts. Where's the other one? Over there. So put that one side for now, and then with that out of the way, this lower part of the steering column can just slide out with its rubber cover for when oh, there's the other screw. I wondered what the rattling was. That's the other screw that couldn't come out. Now there should be 3 screws holding this together, but obviously in mine there's not, there's only the 2. So that's that out. Now all we've got to do is look up there and find the pin to get the ignition switch out, and then we can lift this bit up and we can try and get access to the other bolt. There's one there that holds this arm in, and there's one up under there that we need access to. I think we need the ignition switch out for that. Right, well, that's the ignition out. Oh, that took some doing. And that little silver square you can see just about there, that's where you put pressure on, which pushes that clip in, which allows you to pull the ignition switch out in its entirety. Now you do have to give it a fairly good jerk to get it out, but at least it's out. Oh, sorry I didn't get that on camera, but that took some doing. And this is what it looks like without the ignition switch in. So that's what oh, where are we? God, it's hell working upside down, isn't it? There we are. No, there we are. No, I'll try that again. Hang on a minute. Right, that's a better view. That's what the ignition switch looks like without the actual ignition switch in there. Now, I don't know if you can see the hole underneath. I'll see if I can get that for you as well. Now, I must admit, it's not the easiest thing in the world to try and film. But if you can see that hole just about there, where that yellow wire is, I need that yellow wire to be out of the way when that goes back in. But that hole just there is where you poke something through in order to release that little pin so we can get the ignition switch out. Right, now it's just releasing that top bit of the column, and then we should be able to get the bolts of the multifunction arm and the bolts that are, well, the bolts that are holding that in. That's just so fiddly, so awkward. Thanks Ford for making this like a complete pain in the neck to do. You're not going to be able to get this bit here all the way out, but you can pull it off the ignition switch hose hole or socket. You can pull it off that, angle it up over the top, which gives you the ability of getting it over the top of that ignition switch to get that out, or the hazard light switch rather. And then the only thing we need to do is get access to that bolt that's in there and the one underneath that's in the same place. Unbolt those, lift that off, unplug the wires, and then put the other one in. Now it is awkward, and it is going to be awkward, and obviously this is 30-year-old plastic, so it's a little bit flexible, but it ain't that much flexible, so hopefully this will work. Now the hard part's going to be trying to show you how to get this out. There's a bolt just there, and then up at the top, if you can see it, there's another one just in there. And to take those out, you need one of these, which is, if it focuses, so I can get that to focus, it's a Torx bit, and that one is a 5mm, so that just slots into there. Now it's a little bit tight, but that's it. Once you get it loose, you can actually take that out. So let me get that out and the one on the top out, and then we'll try and work this arm out, which shouldn't be too bad because obviously we've got no bottom cover on. So that's both bolts out. Now this should just come off of there. It's going to be a little bit awkward to get it past the cover on the back of the steering wheel. I think you will need two hands to do this, so once again, give us a minute and I'll get this out of here. So that's the arm out. It's held in by these two plugs. There's that one there and there's that one there. And again, it looks as though somebody's been in here before me because this little clip on here is broken on that one. So I'll just see if I can get those disconnected. Well, that's the old arm out. Now, I did manage to get the second plug disconnected without breaking any of those two clips. So it should, in theory, just be a simple case of putting the new one in, connecting it up on the back, putting the bolts back in, and then hopefully I'll have hazard lights. Right, now that's the arm back in. Just busy tightening up the bolts. Push that down so it goes on the inside, like on the top of that, because that's the hole that the screw goes through. And of course, when you put your cover on, make sure your cover is over your ignition switch. So before I put the whole thing back together and then have to take it apart again if it's still not working, I'll put the ignition switch in, reconnect the battery, and then we'll see if we've got hazard lights in it and put the dashboard back together after that, or put the steering column back together, and move on to the last thing that's preventing me from getting an MOT on this Mustang. Now the ignition switch itself will only go back in one direction. So if you can see inside there, there's sort of black bit in the middle at the back, that's the hole where the lock goes into. Now that seems to go vertical, like up and down. So on the ignition switch, you need to have that the same way. So that wants to be vertical, it could go up and down. If you try and put it in any other direction, it's not going to go in. So you need to have that, so it'll go in like that, and it should be just a good old push, and that'll be in place, like that. And that seems to be working fine. So we'll take the key out, get the battery reconnected, and then we'll see if we've got hazard lights. Now I'm hoping there's not going to be any sparks or clicks or anything, and I've put everything back together properly. So, nope, everything seems okay. So we'll get that back on there. I'm not going to fully tighten it at the moment. Let's go and try the hazard lights, see if they work. Well, this was meant to be the bit where I'll show you the hazard lights working. Unfortunately, they're not working. They're still the same. They haven't changed. But I have found the reason for that. I did think I'd maybe trapped a wire somewhere, but when I took it all apart again to see if I had trapped the wire somewhere, this is what I found. Now hopefully you can see this, but that red wire there, I'm assuming should be attached to that part of the wire there, and it's not. Now it's really strange because the ends haven't been bared. It looks like it's just been cut. There was some electrician's tape around it, which obviously wasn't doing anything at all, but on top of that, as well as that being no longer connected to each other, this one here just slides out of that plug. So the little pin that holds that in is also damaged as well. So hopefully all I've got to do is reconnect this bit of wire to that bit of wire, put the pin back in there properly, reconnect it all, and it might work. Now I have managed to find a couple of clips. There's this sort of like bullet connector, butt connector. So I'm going to put that on one end of the wire, and then next to that I'm going to put this on, because that bit, obviously a bit of wire goes through there, and that end slides straight into the end of there, and that should make the connection. So those connected together, hopefully that's going to give me the ability of having hazard lights in the Mustang, finally. I will use the new arm, I may as well. I'll keep the old ones for spare. It's always worth having a spare. Right, well, if you can see that, I've got the clip on the end of there. So that's like a male connector. So I've managed to get that on the end of there. And I've also got this connector on the end of there as well. Now that should slide into there, and that'll connect those two together, hopefully give them power. But in order to protect it, first of all, I'm going to put a bit of this shrink wrap over the top of it. But I'm not going to heat that up straight away. I want to see if it works first. So let's see if we can get that slid in there one-handed, which blatantly isn't going to work. Right, that's the shrink wrap on. So what I've got to do now is connect these two together, plug this back into there, and then reconnect the arm, and hopefully that should solve the problem. Fingers crossed anyway. And there we are. So that's clipped in to that connection. That's obviously the shrink wrap there, which can be moved around once it's all plugged in. So let's get this connected to the new arm, see if that makes any difference. Now I'm not sure if you can see that, but that is both lights flashing. However, they're no different to what they were before. I've connected all the wires. That broken one, obviously, as you saw in the video, I reconnected that broken one. Well, I'm at a bit of a loss what to do now. I mean, I'm crap at electrics anyway, but I thought that was going to be fairly straightforward. Fix the broken wire, the socket not fitting into the pin, into the plug rather, properly. So obviously reconnected those. It is a good strong connection. I've checked that, plugged it back in, make sure it's plugged in, and as you saw, it's not working. Strangely and ironically, the indicators are both working perfectly well. It's just the damned hazard lights. And obviously without hazard lights, I can't get this through an OT, and I've still got the welding at the back to look at. So sadly, this video is going to have to end without a solution. For now anyway. I need to talk to somebody who knows what they're doing with electrics and find out what the hell's going on. They do work intermittently, they'll go on and they work perfectly, but most of the time they're not working. Well, at least they're not working properly. Never mind. Hopefully I'll be able to find a solution to this. Anyway, if you've enjoyed this video or you're getting some kind of entertainment value from it, caress the like button on the way out and consider subscribing to the channel for more videos like this. And hopefully the next one will end slightly better than this one has. Bye for now.